people could have a seat. Thanks. It's a little bit high. Hi, my name is Dahlia Chazen. I am the chair of the Oakland SPUR board and an associate principal at Arup. I lead the integrated planning team in Oakland and San Francisco. Who is familiar with SPUR? Raise your hand. Anybody not familiar with SPUR? Any non-members? All right, a little public shaming, thank you. So I'll tell you all a little bit about SPUR, those of the four of you. SPUR is a nonprofit member-supported organization. We promote good planning and good government through research, education, and advocacy. We put ideas and action together to make a better city and region. If you are a member, thank you very much. If you are not a member, you should become one. And becoming a member has lots of benefits. You get our amazing publication, The Urbanist, and into events. All of our events for free or with a member discount. And you should do it. The folks back there can help you out. I should also mention up front that this event is being recorded, just so you know. The next event here in Oakland is next Monday, October 28th at 6. It's called Engaging Communities in Resilience Planning. In many communities, resilience planning is synonymous with gentrification. There's a fear that creating a more resilient neighborhood means increasing displacement. And many of these communities are facing far more immediate dangers, such as homelessness, job scarcity, and environmental issues. Yet the participation of these very communities will be critical to our success in addressing global warming. So come learn about the innovative techniques being developed to involve local residents in productive dialogue around the implications of global warming in their neighborhoods. Today, our program is called A More Coordinated Transit Network, Learning from Other Regions. We're going to learn about how other regions have brought fragmented, disconnected transit systems together to create a more customer-focused network. We'll hear the answer to the question, how can this make transit easier and faster for all while offering climate and equity benefits? In this regard, the Bay Area has a lot to learn from domestic and international examples, and today we're going to hear about similar challenges from around the world and learn what's possible. This talk is part of the Connecting Communities series, and Dave from Transform is going to tell you a little bit more about that series.
Thank you, Dahlia. My name is Dave Sevry. I'm with Transform. This is the second year that we've done this Connecting Communities event series. All of these events are free to the public. So if you grab a program, you can read all about the upcoming events. The next one that's going to be live is in Menlo Park. It's about getting downtowns moving with convenient and sustainable access. So there are definitely a lot of great opportunities to learn more about transportation and housing. And I wanted to thank our series sponsors, the American Planning Association, Northern California chapter, Commute with Enterprise, EAH Housing, San Mateo County Office of Sustainability, the Spare the Air Resources team, Zikla Cities, and generous support from the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. So you can find out more at transformca.org. And all of these events are live streamed. There's also a few online-only webinars that we're putting on. So hope you can attend more of them and see you at later events. So back to you, Dahlia. Thank you.
All right, so I'm just going to introduce our speakers and then send them on their way to get started. So first up will be Arielle, and I'm challenged by some of the last names, so we're doing first names only for this. I'm just going to be consistent. I can say some of their last names. Arielle is Transportation Policy Director at SPUR, and she leads SPUR's efforts to create a high-quality transportation system in the Bay Area. And it doesn't say this, but she's doing amazing work around the regional strategy and transportation, which you will see the results of soon. Ian, next, is the co-founder and policy director of Seamless Bay Area, a nonprofit whose mission is to create a world-class, unified, equitable, and widely used transit system. Originally from Canada, Ian has worked as an urban planner and transportation planner for the past 12 years, including at Metrolinx in Toronto and at AECOM, Perkins & Will, and BART here in the Bay Area. Wiebke, next up, is a senior consultant with DB Engineering and Consulting, located in Sacramento, coming from Germany. She has over 9 years of international experience in the mobility and rail industry. Next up will be Elias, who heads the Future Mobility Initiative at Nordic Innovation House in Palo Alto. He is associated with the Strategic Innovation Program Drive Sweden, focusing on how to tackle societal challenges related to the transformations of the transport system. And last but not least, Rick, at the end, serves as the general manager of the Central Contra Costa Transit Authority, or County Connection. Rick brings decades of transportation expertise, serving as the chair for various transportation boards across the Bay Area and California. And I'll let the panel take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Dahlia. Great. So, as Dahlia mentioned, my name is Arielle Fleisher. I serve as SPUR's Transportation Policy Director, and I'm excited for tonight's conversation because the Bay Area is not alone. There's something very comforting about that, right? That we have this not so coordinated, kind of fragmented transportation system, but a lot of other regions were in the same place, thank you, at one point. And they managed to overcome that. They managed to put in place strategies and procedures that led them to a better place. And so I'm really excited tonight about what we can learn, and also to know that we can do this. That other places have done this, they've made big, bold changes, and they've all lived to tell the tale. The trains are still running in Germany, right?
They are.
So tonight, the way this is going to work is we're going to present some foundation, some grounding, myself and Ian. We're going to have some great international examples and turn to Rick at the end to give a real local perspective of what's happening on the ground here in the Bay Area. We'll do a short moderated Q&A, and then we'll turn it over to you guys for your questions and answers. Before I dive in, and I'm going to set the stage, talk a little bit about the problems, I have a couple questions for you all. So who took a non-car mode to get here tonight? Ooh la la. Who took more than one mode today? What did you take? Right there.
Biking and then BART.
Anybody else?
Also, I said transit.
I got 3. Anybody do more than 3 today? What do you got?
We walked and then took AC transit.
It's 2. We got any? It's good. It's good though. Any?
Car, bike share, bus, walk.
Cool. Any more? Let's see. Today, on Monday, we did this panel in Redwood City, and it was like a jack of all trades day. But today was just a BART and bike day for me. But a lot of us, right, on a daily basis, use multiple modes to get where we need to go, and there are challenges inherent in doing that. All right, my final question for you before I dive in, and keep your answer brief and short. If you had a magic wand, if you were the transportation czar for a day, what would you do to make our region's transportation system more coordinated? In the back.
Coordinating schedules when you're transferring between agencies.
I did run from Caltrain to BART on Monday. I made it. In the back.
One transportation agency for all transportation in the Bay Area.
Last one in the front.
More frequent bus service that feeds into BART.
Awesome, more frequent bus service. Okay, right there, we'll do one more.
Good. I want fully accessible transportation for all, universally designed transportation.
I can get behind that for sure.
A monthly pass that applies to all the transit agencies, regardless of whether there's 20 agencies or one agency, you can still have a monthly pass.
Awesome. All really good ideas, and some of the ideas that we'll hear that, again, they did it, so can we. That's the mantra for tonight. All right, let's dive in. You know about SPUR, we did that. So a lot of these ideas I'm going to be presenting tonight were foundational, were put forth in SPUR's report, Seamless Transit, that came out in 2015, written by my former boss, Ratna Amin, and Sarah Bars. And since then, we've been doing a lot of work to implement a lot of the great ideas that they put forth in this report. So a quick transit snapshot. What's happening in the world of transit today? Well, many people are using the car. Auto travel remains the dominant commute mode in the Bay Area, fact. Some of our systems are getting crowded, but for the most part, we're using transit a lot less. Ridership is not growing throughout the region. The fact of the matter also is that many transit riders use more than one transit operator. You see this on this chart above. It's not incredibly legible, but what it does show is that people use it consistently with all the barriers that we have in place. Many people use more than one system to get around the region. It's a fact. So, transit fragmentation, what it does is it undermines the promise of transit, why we put transit on our streets, why we want transit to succeed in our region. When we have a fragmented transit system, it undermines it. So as you know, the region has 25, 26, 27, a lot of different transit operators, and they don't work as one system. They each have their own policies, procedures, and funding sources. And we spend billions and billions of dollars in the Bay Area to maintain these systems, and yet still most trips are made by the car. Most of our transit is funded and planned at the county level, and so this leaves out the region, this leaves out other perspectives in terms of how our transit functions. Oh, I thought I deleted that slide. Well, even in places where we do have transit, where we have been able to put in really good transit, the land use doesn't necessarily support that transit. So would you want to take transit here? Is this a comfortable place for you, an appealing place that supports a transit behavior? Not really. And the rider experience on transit is hard to learn. We have different maps, we have different signage, we have a different language. Operators often ignore their other operators' services in their planning and in their maps. I tell the story that when I used to take Amtrak, I had no idea that Amtrak connected to BART at Richmond. Can't see it on a map, it's not on a map, maps create a reality. So I was always going down to Jack London. And the day I learned, it was like, oh wow, our systems do connect, but our materials don't present that. They don't show us these options that we have. And finally, a lot of the work that we've done recently is each transit operator sets their own fare policy, different fare strategies, so zone and distance, different prices for their trips, different loyalty products as well. Very exciting thing happened today that the Bay Area is, for the first time in 10 plus years, going to actually study fare integration. The Bay Area has not looked at this in over 10 years, so the money was officially allocated today, and this is going to happen. So a really big move in the pursuit of seamless transit, a real important first step towards moving us in a really good direction, towards having more passes, et cetera. But for now, we still have our hodgepodge. There are a lot of gaps in frequent services in our transportation system, arguably because they're not necessarily planned at the right level. And we need to do something new. We create a new agency. We just create lots of single-purpose agencies to solve specific problems. And no one is in charge of the customer experience. The picture says 1,000 words. Why did that older woman need to hop on a bench that is reserved for people with seniors and disabilities to figure out what time the next train is coming? Who's in charge of the transit customer experience? Unfortunately, often no one. And so, in sum, what this all means is we have a bunch of systems in the Bay Area that coexist, but there's nobody actually in charge of planning and coordinating the system as a seamless network rather than a loosely connected set of parts. So we think the Bay Area deserves a legible, interconnected transportation system. Transit needs to work to make great cities. The integrated, coordinated transit systems are essential for our cities to thrive. That we need our transit to work to increase access, fairness, and quality of life. And transit needs to work to implement our hard-won policy goals. A lot of our plans have real big goals for reducing VMT, for transit, for biking. So we need our systems to be able to work to deliver on these goals. So what can we do about it? At SPUR, we talk a lot, and we're going to talk a lot about on this panel tonight, is around reimagining how we plan and deliver mobility. And this is, of course, also thinking about land use, and many of our transportation problems have a land use solution. Put what we need closer together. But also at the core of this issue is a issue of the scale of our decision making. Are we making our decisions at the right scale, the local or the regional scale? And also a problem of not really thinking at the system level, not thinking about the region as a transportation system, and instead having 27 different visions for the future of transportation. These are solutions that are going to require changing our governance and perhaps an expanded state and regional role. There's often over the years been a lot of ad hoc, a lot of coordination and piecemeal. As others will talk about, we can only get so far with that, and at some point we really need to be thinking at a higher level, master planning, coordinating our transportation system more thoughtfully and more thoroughly. And another question too to think about as we reimagine transportation, do transit operators need to do it all? Some of you, when you walked in, we printed out a blog post tonight of some of our learnings from the Cursor Bund. Yes. Pronounced something like that. And one of the things they realized there was transit operators don't have to do everything. We asked them to do so much. Run the service, do the construction, manage the TOD, maybe we can take some of those functions and centralize them. So other things and other ideas that we're also exploring on this panel is what are those essential core functions of our transit agencies? So finally, as a concluding thought, also thinking about that we are very much in a new era of transportation. I'm sure some of you use a scooter to get here tonight. And as our transportation system is changing, what does that mean for our fragmented, uncoordinated transportation systems? Do our institutions also have to evolve to think about new mobility and newer options for mobility? Or are we so behind, arguably, on coordination that we can't even think that far? And ought we to be thinking not just about the transit, but about this greater mobility world that is happening around us as well? So some food for thought, and others on the panel will talk about this too. So with that, I will turn it over to Ian to provide some more context for tonight's discussion.
Thanks, Arielle. Again, my name is Ian Griffiths, and I'm the Policy Director for Seamless Bay Area. Ooh, the colors are
Only on
strange.
that one. That one's good.
This is a much prettier map in reality. It doesn't usually look like
Oh,
that.
yeah, sorry about that.
Here's the colors it's supposed to be. So our mission, Seamless Bay Area is a nonprofit. We're about 2 years old, and our mission is to transform the Bay Area's public transit system into a world-class, unified, equitable, and widely used system by doing two key things. One is developing the actual policy reforms and the legislation that will get us to the point of reformed institutions, but also, and equally importantly, building the grassroots and public support to support those institutional reforms, and really connecting the riders and the needs of people who use the system with the importance of those reforms. And that's where we feel like that's going to be critical for building the political will to actually move past what has been an increasingly fragmented system over the past 50 years. Riders and people and the public haven't been calling for these reforms, and as a result, our state and regional legislators have been thinking that the status quo is acceptable. We need to be drawing the connection that people see institutional reform and see institutions as part of the solution. So I won't go, Elia talked about the trends. There's this opportunity in front of us that is really that also makes this a different point in time from past efforts, which is that we have this conversation going on around new funding, the concept of a regional funding measure that many groups are talking about that could raise $50 to $100 billion for transit that is being discussed to be put on the ballot next November. Some polling surrounding that measure is that there's strong support among average members of the public for increasing taxes to support more transit investments, particularly when that investment is associated with words like seamless, reliable, fast, and affordable. That's what people want to spend their money on. But there's also limited trust in the capacity of our existing public institutions to actually deliver on that promise if they were given that funding. And our two largest newspapers writing editorials over the summer, basically making that exact point. They both said we need more money for transit, but what do we have to believe that this new money will do anything differently from how we spent money in the past, which has not resulted in increased transit ridership or lowering amounts of driving. Our vision for a seamless connected network is a connected rapid transit network that is strategically planned at the regional level to work as a system. It's master planned, where transit agencies work together to operate different parts of that integrated network, and where service quality, fares, schedules, wayfinding, and other components of the customer experience are standardized to be as simple and reliable as possible for users, and where buses and other high-capacity vehicles move quickly on all of our major roads, regardless of what city they're in or what county, or if they're state roads or local roads. We know that there's ways in a region as complex and diverse as the Bay Area. We know there are regions that are doing this much, much better, and Wiebke will talk more about the German example, but just a side-by-side comparison here of Frankfurt, the greater Frankfurt area with the Bay Area. This is a region with just many centers, many mid-sized cities, a polycentric region with multiple urban areas and employment centers. They have more municipalities than in the Bay Area. They have 160 transit operating companies. But since they put in place the governance framework for a highly coordinated network in the mid-90s, creating this Verkehrsverbund where it's a transit network manager that has a regional function coordinating all the core components of a regional system, they've seen 60% transit ridership growth since the mid-1990s in comparison to, over the same period of time, only 16% in the Bay Area. They're now at about triple the transit mode share, triple the number of trips taken on transit than we are here in the Bay Area. So we know that with these reforms, we can see the true results of increasing transit ridership over time. But we're missing, in our institutions, the various agencies that we have, we're missing this key regional function, which is the role of a network manager. We've been conducting interviews with general managers, senior transit agency staff, consultants, elected officials, and experts from around the world to ask what are these key functions that should be done at the regional level and don't necessarily need to be done at the transit agency level. And we've heard a great degree of consensus on what those key things are. Long-range planning, fare policy, service standards, all the things listed there, and that Arielle was making the point that these are the things that customers want to be done. They want them to be consistent. There's a whole bunch of other functions that don't necessarily need to be done centrally and that are fine to be done by local operators, which is why we see in the terminal examples and in many other cities that there isn't just one agency. A lot of these functions make sense to be not necessarily centralized. But we're missing that key network manager function that hasn't been clearly defined in the legislative mandate of any organization that exists, and as a result, everything's falling through the cracks. And there's so much accountability because there's so many transit agencies, but in some cases there's really no accountability because no one's responsible for the overall outcomes of our system. And there's many models to choose from. These are a few. Sometimes this role of a transit network manager is a sole purpose entity that doesn't actually operate any transit, but does the coordination function. But then there's other examples like the ones on the right where the transit network manager is also a transit operator that operates either the entire system, like is the case in TransLink in Vancouver, or only a part of the system, as is the case with Sound Transit in Seattle. So Seamless Bay Area has developed a specific policy proposal for how we actually advance these reforms in concert with a regional funding measure. Broadly, to get to a seamless system, we need to define what our vision and targets are for a seamless system. We need to direct resources to get there, and then we need to develop all at once, we need to develop the institutions that can actually deliver that. Those are the three pieces. The regional funding measure, this is some numbers you might hear in the future. SB 278, that's the bill that's been assigned to this bill that will likely be moving forward in the 2020 legislative session. That bill right now looks like it's going to do that second policy objective of really putting resources towards things that will move us towards goals. But right now, one approach for us to be able to meet all of our policy objectives and importantly, develop the institutions that are capable of delivering that, one approach is a companion bill piece of legislation that would move alongside that bill that would initiate a process of institutional reform. Another possibility is that those legislative reforms could be baked right into the same bill that is the enabling legislation for the regional measure. Our specific proposal for whether we go with either of those two approaches, what we've found based on the interviews we've conducted and the research we've completed on failed processes in the Bay Area as well as successful processes elsewhere is that we need a law that basically requires that the state designate a transportation network manager for the Bay Area by a deadline, by a clear deadline that is mandated to do certain key things like coordinate fares, service standards, schedules, customer experience, branding, data, all of those key things. Establish regional centers of excellence throughout the region for things like project delivery. And the process we're proposing to define who that network manager is and whether that's an existing agency like the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, whether it's MTC with some tweaks to how their governance is structured, or whether it's not MTC, whether it's potentially an operator that we already have or a merger of operators that we already have. Whatever the entity, we're proposing a state commission on Bay Area transportation governance and funding that would be tasked with with studying the collective and individual performance of all Bay Area transportation agencies, all the 27 transit agencies, the 10 congestion management authorities, MTC, Caltrain, all of the numerous players that have overlapping mandates right now, and developing a set of legislative reforms that address the problem as a whole, and figuring out where that network manager function should reside, at the same time recommending what other institutional realignments and or consolidations should occur so that we have a logical, accountable system moving forward. And it may involve multiple operators, moving forward. We're not prescribing merging all the agencies, but we need to create accountability. Finally, before I turn, I just want to emphasize, how do we build public support for this? How do we how do we get normal people to care about all this wonky stuff? We've tried to develop a set of simple, seamless transit principles that riders can get behind, that everyone can say, yeah, tell their local leaders, this is what we want. We want to run all Bay Area Transit as one ECU system, put riders first. So this is an initiative that you can go online and sign our petition if you support these proposals. We encourage you to share them with locally elected leaders. We're trying to get transit agency boards and local city councils to pass resolutions in support of this as a long-term policy direction, to really show our state leaders that we, the Bay Area, are ready for this. And this is not something that Bay Area transit agencies or cities are going to oppose if there's a piece of legislation, but in fact that they'll welcome it because it's supportive of these long-term goals. So thank you.
Perfect. So I was delighted to see earlier that so many people of you came here with public transit. Unfortunately, I must admit that I came here by car from Sacramento. I would have had to take 3 different transit operators, looking up 3 different schedules. I relied on Google, but then also purchasing 3 actual tickets through apps or ticket vending machines. Imagine it really would have only taken you 1 single schedule, 1 single ticket, and 1 single tariff or fare to get here. And that's what we call a Verkehrsverbund in Germany, or a transport association. So my name is Wiebke Geldmacher. Oh, I haven't changed the slides yet. So my name is Wiebke Geldmacher, and I'm working with DB Engineering and Consulting here in the USA, located in Sacramento. For those of you who are unfamiliar with DB, we are part of the German railway and are located in 3 different cities across the North American market. We've been here since 2017 and have been supporting as the early train operator for the California High-Speed Rail. So jumping into the concept of transport associations in Germany and looking a little at the history of how it really started. When we look at the years up to 1945, we saw that the automobile was really successful, just because it became affordable for everyone. And along with industrialization, we saw that we had a lot of ecological problems that then evolved, with trams decreasing, ridership decreasing in public transit, and private mobility was just a thing at that time. And then as the years evolved, moving to 1970, we saw that public transit became more and more important. The government invested a lot more money, infrastructure was developed. And this was one of the reasons why the first transport association developed in Hamburg in 1965. Just because of the fact that people demanded to only buy 1 single ticket to go within the city from one origin to one destination. And then Munich soon followed that approach because they had the Olympic Games soon after, so they thought this concept is really a great thing to be copying, and followed in 1972. And along with growing ridership, environmental awareness became more and more important. So following those years, we saw that public transit became that thing in Germany, with more and more transit associations developing by themselves, supported by regulations, and I'll come to that back later, but then also by the support of the European Union. And then what we see today is really a change from not only having transport associations that focus on public transit only, but really connecting more and more services that also include private operators, such as bike sharing, car sharing, scooter sharing, and so forth. So the concept of the Verkehrsverbund can be really characterized by 3 keywords, which is 1 ticket. So either it's really a physical ticket, or it's through an app. The other thing is it's 1 tariff, meaning 1 single fare. So you don't have to worry about whether you're a senior at the age of 62 with 1 operator, but with 65 with another operator, but really just buying 1 single ticket and not having to worry about that. And then one schedule is the most important thing, I would personally say, as transfers are really well organized, transfer times are minimized, and making sure that all the major destinations can be reached in a minimal time. The picture I've brought here is from Munich at a station, and as you can see, transport associations have really influenced the way of how our stations are designed. So I think the first thing you would notice is that we look at an open and barrier-free system in Germany, which is really a quality standard to ensure that people can freely move around from one system to the other. And indicated here with the white arrows, you can see different transit operators actually connecting at that station, and those ticket validation machines in the middle that ensure that the transit operators would know when you scan your ticket which transit operator you would have used. So if you use passes, this is done via surveys, so they can get an idea of what is used and make sure that the revenue allocation is working in the background. So now, what is the concept about transport association in terms of setup? It's really a 3-layer model where we look at the political level with cities, counties, and region giving the general direction of where public transit is heading to. Then we look at the management level where the transport association itself is organized. And their key function is really to make sure that the schedules work, that every transit operator aligns on one single ticket, that they align on one fare, and they can also include tasks such as marketing and communications. And the other task that I've mentioned before is the revenue allocation, which is also one very important thing. And then on the last level, we see the operative level, which is not surprising. So it's really the transit operator that is actually doing the service. So transport associations would issue an RFP, and then any company can bid on that and be the transit operator within that region. And going to the legal side of transit associations, I said earlier that everything's really supported by the government and by regulations, by laws, and so forth. And it really starts with the German constitution that states that there's a minimum demand of mobility amongst the public that has to be fulfilled by the government. And then there's the Regionalization Act, which states that funding is spread across the regions to make sure that it's really used where it's locally needed. Then we have county regulations and, of course, further laws and regulations, including the European Union ones. Oops, wrong direction. So some important facts and figures of what we look at today. Today we have more than 100 transport associations in Germany, which leads to the fact that 83% of the German population live within those regions and can profit from what we have. And then we look at approval ratings of 90%, which are really amongst the highest in Europe. Other important facts are that 88% of Germans live within a mile of public transit, so you can see how much it has evolved over time. And then 10 minutes is the average waiting time in Hamburg, Munich, and Berlin, making it clear that public transit is really used in Germany and attracts a lot of ridership. Another important statistic is the 73% of people who make transfers in Munich, Berlin, and Hamburg, which underlines the fact that they use different transit operators and highlights how important it is to have those transit associations that we have. And then we look at 9% ridership increase between 2008 and 2017, which might not seem a lot, but remember we're really looking at a very high ridership already in Germany. So this was just like getting a little more on top of what Ian already described.
Keep bragging.
So what I brought here is a very recently launched example from Berlin. It's an app called Wiebke, which is essentially a mobility app that was developed in conjunction with the Berliner Verkehrsgesellschaft, who have then involved the local transport association as well as many private operators to make sure that people can transfer in Berlin from one operator to another, but also using all those private operators that are spread across the town. And Wiebke has been launched in summer. They've seen a lot of success so far. I'm curious to use it later this year, as I've been hearing really good things about it, people can plan anything from origin to destination and would get the best choice regardless of what the operator is or what the private operator is. And then lastly, what are the key things in terms of derivable approaches for the Bay Area or other regions? I think we are looking at 3 different items here. One of them is being the political and legal framework, and Ian has talked a lot about the role here as the network manager. Stakeholder engagement is certainly one of the most important things as well, and we've also seen that in Germany. It's sometimes hard to get everyone on board, and it's been taking years for us as well, and it's still ongoing, as you've seen. And then last but not least, is of course important to have really clear goals and objectives of what you're looking for and what the ultimate goals are. And with that, I hand it over to Elias.
Thank you very much for inviting me here, and very nice to see so many people here wanting to hear about public transport. I'm Elias, and I'm based here at Nordic Innovation House in Palo Alto, and I work for a strategic innovation program in Sweden called Drive Sweden, focusing on future transport. I wanted to kick off here by telling you something about Sweden before we start, and I don't know how many people have been to Sweden. Not that many, yeah, some. For you who don't know, we are a small country up in the north of Europe, and we are approximately the same size as California. However, we are only 10 million people in Sweden, so we are quite small when it comes to population in the European Union. We, as a population, are quite curious and working towards the UN sustainability goals, and I would say we're quite curious about the climate crisis and how to deal with that in different ways. For example, we have a word in Swedish called flygskam. It's a word for the feeling of being ashamed of taking an airplane. And we have Greta, as you maybe have heard about. She's striking for the climate. And Sweden is also ranked as the second most innovative country in the world after Switzerland. We also are quite, we have the zero vision that's quite popular here in California as well. I think it's a data-driven method for working for reducing the fatalities in traffic. And when it comes to public transport in Sweden, we are quite positive towards public transport as a population. 96% of people in Sweden believes that public transport is something that is good for society. And 75% believes that we should give priority to public transport over car usage in different ways. And however, the market share for public transport in Sweden, it's only 30% approximately. But that's very much because of our geography, and we have in the rural areas, it's kind of more complex to offer good public transport, I would say. However, in the capital region, we have a market share of 80% for public transport when it comes to peak hours, so that's quite high. And we have a 80% customer satisfaction at the national level. We also run public transport in Sweden on renewable energy up to 90% if we look at the national level. In Stockholm and the capital region, it's actually 100% since 1 year or something like that. When we look at the governance in Sweden, we have 3 different levels. We have the state level, we have the regional level, and we have municipalities. And the public transport is mainly about the state and regional level. So if we look at the long distance public transport in Sweden, connecting cities, it's a completely deregulated market, so we have private operators running on the infrastructure, but the infrastructure is then owned by the state. And some coordination, of course, is necessary when we come to train and stuff like that. Otherwise, it would be kind of a disaster, I would say. When we look at the regional level, we have 50% subsidized public transport, and this is coordinated by the regional public transport administration. And this actor is also coordinating the fare system and the ticketing and the information for the system in the region. However, all the operation is run by private companies, so we have public procurements for the operations in all cases. And when it comes to coordination, I think we have a quite strong coordination at the regional level. As we have been speaking about earlier, we have this kind of regional actor taking responsibility for ticketing, information, fares, and or also coordination between different actors running the public transport. Then we also have the national level, where we have a coordination by an organization called Samtrafiken. It's owned by all the regional public transport authorities together with private operators. And at Samtrafiken, it's very much about coordinating data and timetables at the national level, and also to facilitate ticket collaboration between those different actors. So it's possible to buy a ticket from A to B in Sweden with one single ticket, although it's many different actors running this trip, so to speak. We also have coordination at the Nordic level when it comes to data and APIs and standards in different ways. And of course, as you mentioned, we have the EU level and a lot of upcoming regulation in order to coordinate public transport even more in Europe. So this is quite a hot topic in Europe as well, I would say. When it comes to infrastructure and investments in infrastructure, we have had a process of kind of a state-led negotiation process between different actors in Sweden. So it's very much about finding financing from different actors together for infrastructure projects that are prioritized from different actors. And it has been very successful, so now we have a very large amount of infrastructure projects coming up, and that has just started, I would say. And the key learnings from Sweden, it's very much to have this common goals and strategic objectives for the work in mobility. And we have quite many different organizations as well, and different responsibilities in different ways. But I think when you have this kind of common goal, it's possible to coordinate your actions even though you are many different actors. However, I think from the Swedish perspective, we're very much looking into future challenges in this area. And I mean, we see big revolutions coming up in the field of mobility. And I think it's very interesting to see how this area of the world is very innovative, and you have like large companies offering very innovative solutions in this field of mobility. And it's also very interesting to see how those new innovations will affect public transport, and how we can deliver public transport in a good way in the future, and keep public transport as a backbone together with those new services. The way we're dealing with those kind of future challenges in Sweden, it's often to create those strategic innovation programs. And Drive Sweden is one of those strategic innovation programs in Sweden, focusing on future mobility. And what we do in those programs is very much about bringing all the stakeholders together. It's both private actors and public actors working together with a very much holistic perspective and viewing on those challenges from many different angles. And just a few examples of projects we are running in this area it's creating, now it's very hard to read on this slide, but it's projects like creating more of a national coordination when it comes to ticketing, also taking into account what's happening when the big platform companies are going into this area of mobility, and also how to take care of new modes of transport in this coordination of ticketing. We are also having a number of different pilots when it comes to self-driving buses integrated into the normal public transport in different ways. And we have some co-creation projects where we are kind of trying to figure out how to design future solutions for making them useful for customers of different types. And then we have more of technical projects focusing on data sharing between private and public actors, and also how to use AI for optimizing the delivery of public transport, and some policy labs and stuff like that. I would also like to mention that we are organizing a summit in January here in the Bay Area, focusing on those challenges for the future transport system. Yeah, that's me.
Okay, am I audible? I want to check in with the moderator. Want to make sure we leave time for Q&A. So what time is this session due to end?
We have time. If we're clearly running over 7, we'll probably go to about 7:15, 7:20, 7:30. No later than that, because I'm hungry. I'm sure many of you are as well. But if you do need to leave, please do so quietly.
Okay,
Take your
thanks.
time, Rick. We look forward to
I don't
hearing.
want to dribble on while there's important questions coming from the audience. I represent a local transit operator here. How many in the Bay Area are familiar with how many transit operators there are? And okay, more than I would typically see in a room like this, which is good. So, real quickly, we are we're right in no man's land at my agency, and we're unique in some oddball ways. I have been with our agency since right before Loma Prieta. So I cut my teeth on daily looking at where to put buses to cover things after Loma Prieta when the Bay Bridge was unavailable to commuters. And I've been there ever since, and they were silly enough to keep promoting me, and now I in theory run the place, but it actually runs me on most days. We are considered small within the Bay Area, but we are considered a medium-sized agency as defined by the state of California and the FTA, the Federal Transit Administration. And in fact, we have many of the same challenges as our large compatriots. We have public unions that are very aggressive, much like AC Transit, BART, Muni, VTA, but we carry kind of a load, and we serve a network that's more akin to a small operator that contracts out to a contractor. So we're sort of right there in the middle, if you will. In part because I've been around longer than most of the folks, I'm currently the chair of what's known as the Bay Area Partnership Board, and it's the closest thing we have to a formalized group of folks that get together and talk about these kinds of things in theory. There's, of course, the MTC, and the MTC does a lot of work in the realm of coordination. But their main function, as they would admit, is to receive the funds and get the funds out that come from the state and federal government, in particular, to help do transit and road projects in the Bay Area. So the thing about the partnership is that it's been around since the mid-90s, and its original purpose was actually a pretty positive purpose, and that is through MTC's leadership and former Congressman Norm Mineta, in a federal transportation bill that was passed in 1991 called ICE-T, for the first time ever, you could flex highway funds to transit in areas like the Bay Area, LA, New York, across the country, where you weren't going to build more freeways. There was already this sense that we need more transit. And so the Bay Area cities and counties and road guys were not happy about that. So the partnership was put together to try to bring consensus so that when MTC came together and adopted recommendations from their staff on how to spend federal and state funds that could be either for highways or transit, there was some sort of consensus. And so we got together to discuss. That was our original purpose. And the partnership board still is constituted the same way, which means we have 27 operators, 9 CMAs. Does anybody know what a CMA is? A congestion management agency. Okay, far less. In the state of California, the voters in 1990 passed Propositions 108, 116, and 111, which did a number of things, including created essentially what's called the State Transit Assistance Program, which is STA funds, which is very important to transit in California. One of the other things those 3 measures did was it required each county to create a congestion management agency and basically said you need to manage congestion in your counties and work with the partners to figure out how to reduce congestion. I'm not picking on anybody here, but the only place in California where the CMAs do anything is the Bay Area. And that's not necessarily a positive thing, because the CMAs are still advocating an MTC for flexible money to go towards streets and roads to this day. And we, in Contra Costa County, work very closely with our CMA. We have a tax measure that they're putting on in March that's going to raise money for transit and so forth. But through the work of some of my colleagues at the table and some of you in the audience, showing up at their board meetings pushed them more towards a pro-transit measure for March than where they started from at the beginning of the process. Because the cities and counties of the Bay Area, despite SB1, despite a lot of resources, are still in many cases not able to keep up with their road maintenance. So if they have a voice at the table, they speak loudly. And the partnership is still made up of a lot of those folks. The partnership has not been very active of late. Therese McMillan, our second or third day, I think it was, she contacted me after she became the new executive director at MPC and said, I want to reinvigorate the partnership board. I want to make it meaningful. We need to tackle these issues, or someone's going to do it for us. We need to together figure this out. And so we're trying to reinvigorate the partnership board. I don't know where that's going to go yet. I'm optimistic, but I've been around long enough to have a little bit of jadedness about this. We have another body that we try to get together that has been very effective, and that's the Clipper Executive Board. The Clipper Executive Board oversees the Clipper program for the Bay Area, and over the last few years, we've become very cohesive and collegial, and we're working really well together, and I've seen each one of my colleagues at some point or another in those deliberations put aside a parochial interest for the greater good. We are now being charged with overseeing this fair integration study that Arielle and Ian spoke of. And I'm excited about that because we have the unique perspective, dual perspective of, one, understanding the need to get that done, and 2, understanding how hard it's going to be. Why is that hard? If I were sitting in the room, I would say, well, why is that guy saying it's hard? It sounds like a typical bureaucrat. Well, it is very bureaucratic because transit is highly regulated. Public transit is highly regulated in the state of California and in Washington, D.C. And so when I do a fare increase or a fare decrease or a change in fare structure, I have to do what's called a federal Title VI analysis to make sure that nothing I do has an undue impact or burden on a protected class as defined by the federal government. Then there's a state overlay to that. So when we do fare integration in the Bay Area, if we still have 27 operators, and I'm not advocating that we have 1 or 2 or 3 or 5, I don't know what the magic number is. That gets decided above my pay grade. But I do know that as we move from what we have today to a more integrated fare system, there may be an operator or 2 that gets tripped up on Title VI, which will slow the process down. It's not because no one wants to do it, it's because you gotta comply with that regulation. And federal funds are very important to the Bay Area. Without federal funds, we're not getting new BART cars. We're not getting BART rehab. AC Transit would be running 20-year-old buses. We would not be buying electric buses out in Contra Costa County without federal funds. And in order to get those federal funds for transit, you have to comply with these slug of regulations that they were written in many cases in the 50s and 60s. And the Congress can't come to grips with that. I mean, can you imagine this Congress coming to grips with that when they can't even come to grip with, their big stuff? So that is something we'll have to work through, and I think the Clipper Executive Board is going to do a good job with that, working with the consultants and our partners and these good folks here that will be showing up, making sure we keep that ball moving down the field. The other thing that I think Therese and I have talked about tackling, which is going to be easier said than done, is schedule coordination. So let me just give you an example of what we do, but my residents will be the first to tell you in Contra Costa it ain't good enough, and I don't blame them. So BART and County Connection, we try to coordinate our schedules. We've been doing it for years. A lot of people aren't aware of that. So typically if BART makes a service change, they let us know 90 days in advance, which gives us time to write new schedules. It's a resource issue, and people really don't get this. So BART in the peak has really high service going through the Concord line, or the Bay Point line, or whatever we call it now these days. And we only have enough resource to meet every third or fourth train with a bus. Now someone says, well, why don't you put more resources in that time of the day? Well, we are asked to provide trips to kids to school. There's no school buses in Contra Costa County. That's because of Prop 13. So in Prop 13, how many of you know what Prop 13 is? Okay, good. And somebody young, I ask my kids, what's Prop 13? And they look at me like, what? I don't know. So Prop 13 passes, the schools get rid of school bus service, and they call up the transit operators and they say, help. So in our bus schedules, we have to accommodate school bell times. There's also job centers in the 680 corridor, not nearly as many as in Oakland or San Francisco. So all those things tug on our schedules, and we still do a pretty good job of coordinating with BART for the amount of buses we put out there. But every day, or nearly every day, something goes wrong. BART might be a little late, we might be a little late. It doesn't take much, and there's the guy who gets off the BART train, say at Walnut Creek, and he or she is coming down the escalator and they see the bus pull away. And they think we're stupid. What is wrong with you people? And so we dig into it, we get the complaint, we say, well, that bus was waiting for the previous BART train, which came in a little late, and then it took a while to load people, and the people that were already on there were screaming, get going, you're 10 minutes late. And so we pulled away. And then the next bus doesn't come for 20 or 30 minutes because we don't have the resources to put the bus out there. So that's kind of the challenge. And I'm not, whenever I talk about this, I think, am I subconsciously arguing for consolidation because I am not authorized to do that? My board has not said go out and talk about that. So that segues into another thing I'll mention real quickly, and that is the Bay Area has a lot of government. And it's a unique thing in my view. We have 9 counties, we have nearly 100 cities and towns, all with their own councils and elected officials. When MTC did their transit sustainability study a few years ago, and they started from a perspective, should we look at consolidation, they quickly moved away from that. They had a chart that showed there were 230 independent board members on these transit agencies, all with their own authority, all with their own ideas about what should happen. Valley Link, I'll use that. That showed up on an earlier slide. I know a little bit about that project because it's my neighboring agency, Lafton. We do a lot of coordination with them, so that comes up in our discussions. They jumped into the fray when nobody wanted to do a rail thing that the local folks in Livermore, Dublin, and Pleasanton think should exist. So they managed to get a bill through the state legislature, the same state legislature that's going to have to pass this faster thing. The same state legislature that may get asked to do something about governance is the same state legislature that passed a bill that created Valley Link. I'll just leave it at that. You can all reach your own conclusions about how this works. But that's why Valley Link now is a thing that wants to be fed. That will they coordinate with BART? Will they coordinate with San Joaquin on the other side? I don't know. But that is our history. All of these folks getting elected to office, wanting to do something positive for their local folks. A good friend of mine who works at MTC once told me that in the Bay Area, we believe in regionalism until it comes home, then we become localists. Yeah. It's just like housing. Everybody agrees we need more housing, but don't put it next to me, because I'll come out and oppose it. So here we have in San Ramon, California, a really progressive business park saying, you know, we've got all these jobs here, we're gonna build 4,500 dense housing units inside of our business park. So people can walk to work, walk to shop, because they have a new shopping area. And the proposal's not even official yet, and the opposition has lined up in San Ramon to stop that. Yet these are the same folks that come to me and say, run a bus for me at 7:40 so I can catch this BART train. I'm gonna be the only person on the bus, but hey, I want that bus. And so, you know, I have local board members that respond to those things too. So that's part of what's not working here, and I think we're gonna probably, at the end of the day, need more than the partnership board to get these goals accomplished, because they're very, on one hand, they're very obvious. On the other hand, there's this political machinery that we're gonna have to work together to bust through. And we're gonna have to find political champions if we want to do some of these things. You know, I have 11 board members, and they're real mixed on fares. I have some that wanna reduce fares to induce ridership, and I have others that say we need to raise the fares because they'll go to Hawaii. You know, and they'll ride a bus and it'll cost them $3 to ride the bus in Hawaii. I said, well, everything costs more in Hawaii. Your Coke costs $5. It's always with a Coke, you know. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of flavor of what's going on out there. These 27 agencies did not happen by design. They happened over time organically. So the Bay Area agreed to do BART, and AC Transit chose not to go away. Then in San Mateo County, they didn't join the BART district. So they weren't paying the half-cent sales tax to BART, so they create Samtrans with their half cents. That's what happened in San Mateo. You know, San Jose was ignored for years by Oakland and San Francisco. They started their own thing. Then in our area, after Prop 13, there was this sense that AC Transit was cutting service out in the suburbs, probably rightfully so due to ridership. But, you know, it was an anti-tax period, and the suburbanites were, you know, we're not paying taxes so people can ride buses in Oakland. So they broke away, and MTC actually facilitated that. And again, I'm not pointing fingers. It's a different time and place. So now you have all these different agencies, and I think if we started today with nothing on the map, we would probably do something different. And I'll leave you with one more thing, and then I do think we should get to Q&A, and that is most of these local services that are out there do a good job of the local trips. The trips that are 4 miles or less tend to be well used everywhere in the Bay Area. So maybe what we need is an overlay. And I'm just gonna throw this out as a provocative example. Los Angeles, one of the most misunderstood places by Bay Areans, Bay Area-ites, or whatever we call ourselves. Los Angeles has 42 transit systems. But they have one big one, that's the regional system, and that's LA Metro. So LA Metro does the planning, they're the MPO, and they operate the regional system. The rail, they're building the subways, they run the buses that go from Santa Monica to Pomona. But there's these smaller systems that run localized service, and they leave them alone. They struck this deal back in the 90s, and they just leave them alone. So Culver City runs buses. Santa Monica has the big blue bus. Torrance has a bus system. Pasadena has a bus system. On and on and on, but they've got this overlay. So if you're in West LA and you want to get to East LA, you use LA Metro. If you're in West LA and you want to get out to Santa Monica, you can take the big blue bus. And they've got these different things going on. And to me, there's something to be learned from that. I know in the Bay Area we don't like to look at LA for any examples, but you know, and when I talk with the Faster folks as a general manager, they talk about this Faster brand and this overlay. And then Transform has this proposal called REX that some of you might want to get familiar with. Those kinds of things, as brand new systems, might be really what we need, as opposed to how do we get these local guys to be more regional, and it might be simpler to let the local stuff stay and take the new dollars and create this regional thing. And again, that's just me speaking, and I'm just sort of throwing out there something to kind of leave you with.
Awesome. Thank you, Rick. Thank you to all of our panelists tonight. A big round of applause. I think what's interesting, I think the international examples give us something to strive for, but to Rick's point, it's not that easy, and there's a lot of layers and things that we need to peel back if we're going to be really to move forward. And we have to acknowledge the complexity inherent in this and be willing be willing to dive into it. I think that's our responsibility as leaders. If you guys will indulge me 1 second before I let you have questions, real briefly, I want to ask you, is there anything tonight that you heard that really surprised you? Just raise your hand, brief answer. Something you heard tonight, you went, huh? Andy?
We're
Part-
a well-kept secret.
Their meeting is
You know,
on Friday if you want to
meetings are
join.
public. If you want to get on the mailing list, let me know.
One more
But-
person. What's
but
something
I
that
just-
surprised you? It's a lot. What's something you heard tonight that you want to learn, that made you curious, that you want to learn more about? Rex. Good one. In the back? See a hand?
Why transit agencies don't have anyone in charge of customer experience.
Cheers. Go for it.
I'm curious about this allocation by MTC for studying fragmented integration. We hear a lot about transit officials not being very interested in customer experience. It seems like a small step forward. I wonder why that happened right now.
Interesting. Awesome. Thank you guys for sharing those. All right, we'll open it up to questions. Again, if you have to leave, please do so quietly. We'll probably go for about 10 minutes or so. James?
I worked for LACTC back in the early 90s. And back in LA, you had big RTD, which is a big old bus company. You had a small startup called LACTC. We just built rail lines. So back in the mid-90s, we merged. And we became hungry. And we changed the whole LA system to this today. Now we have a big regional company that does rail, even taking Caltrain down there. But somebody has to be hungry here to want to change things.
Yeah.
What made MTA powerful is it became very political. So every region is saying, well, Valley, Sacramento Valley, South Bay, they're all fighting for money, they're all fighting for ideas, and all of a sudden you have all these rail lines popping up left and right. Because we were able to create the system we wanted in this political world that really made it dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it more dynamic. But here, this thing is just kind of like you're trying to fix something that's just it's kind of broken, not really broken. You need a group that's hungry and visionary.
So your question is, how do we get more hungry?
Yeah.
Well,
What's the
Ian,
big vision here?
I think you've been a good example of your group exposing the hunger and that people are hungry for this.
Yeah, I think we need we're trying to initiate this mandate to do better, a state mandated commission that actually sets this out as the goal and assesses the governance structures that can get us there and build the political support for that. So yeah, I agree. It's lacking here, and there isn't this sense of urgency that we have to do something about it, and that we need to look structurally at how to go about fixing that.
If I just,
Please, yeah.
Richard Katz, remember Richard Katz? Yeah. With all due respect to all my Bay Area elected officials, and I've worked with many of them, and I like them a lot and respect them a great deal, I've never met a Richard Katz up here.
Can you,
For those of you who don't
Yeah.
know who Richard Katz was, he was chair of the Assembly Transportation Committee for years, and he was the main political force behind the merger of RTD and LACTC. And then he brokered the deal with the San Gabriel Valley that wanted to have their own system because they didn't want to have to deal with the unions. And so they carved out Foothill Transit that runs from east of Pasadena out to the county line with San Bernardino, and they contract everything out, although they have their own union issues now too. I mean, that just comes with transit, it seems. So the closest thing we had in the Bay Area was Senator Quentin Kopp. When I first started in the late 80s, he was in the Senate through the 90s. He got termed out, and he ran a couple of consolidation bills, and he couldn't get his Bay Area colleagues to support it. And so, the rest of the state legislature said, well, why would we work on this bill that's controversial within your own region? So I think those kinds of champions are important if we can find them.
Another question? Right there? You. Yes, you.
So I'm pretty new to this scene, but when I look at news articles, what I see a lot of times is the transit agencies want things that are new and innovative and really expensive. And then you get these situations where, somebody who really needs to be able to depend on transit to get to their job, they can't afford it. It's cheaper to take an Uber many places than it is to take public transit. And And so how can, how can public citizens like help affect? Like, let's do what works instead of being like, this has to be the like coolest, newest thing ever. Just,
Yeah.
yeah.
Go for it.
So I agree, and I think it speaks to the lack of a clear framework for evaluating capital projects and our public funding in the Bay Area. So there is even though MTC allocates a lot of money, there isn't a very transparent or evidence-based system for how that money gets funded. And as a result, we have a patchwork of projects. We have transit agencies, each defining however they choose, and oftentimes greatly influenced by their locally elected board members, what projects they want to pursue. And sometimes it might be that shiny new thing, and not something that is proven through evidence that it will bring more riders to the system, or that so regions that have effective, that have growing transit ridership, that have highly coordinated networks, have very strong investment frameworks that are based on business cases that evaluate the financial case, the strategic, the equity case, the implementation business case for these major investments, so that before we spend billions of dollars of things, it's very clear what the benefits are expected to be, and that we've evaluated the other alternatives to get to those same benefits, and making sure we're picking the most cost-effective, most deliverable project that isn't risky or trying something that's never been done before. And that's core to our proposal for governance reform is adopting that kind of regional framework.
Sarah in the green?
In
Yes.
green.
Yep, it's you.
David, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know your name.
I just want to introduce myself because I can't see any of you. First of all, I'd like to get all your contact information. I'm with the Transit Justice Project. For seniors and people with disabilities, we represent more than 25% of the Bay Area's population, yet accessible transportation is it's not very good. It's not very accessible. And we are funded by the San Francisco Foundation and sponsored by the East Bay Center for the Blind in Berkeley. And Ian, if you could help me get all these people's contact information, including Arielle's,
Sure.
and also the public, the policy director of Transform, and all of you folks from County Connection, Germany, and Sweden, I would appreciate it. Now, my question is this, to County Connection, have you considered trying some micro-transit experiments?
Yes, we've done a couple of things, and we're working on a couple more. Probably the biggest thing we did a 6-month demo. There's an area just east of Danville, out there, where there was a housing development that went in, and there was a lawsuit to stop the development. And as the thing was settled in court, there was a transit fee that's collected, which is that's the innovative piece. Is every year the residents of this neighborhood pay a transit fee that's collected by the county, and then the county decides how to spend that money. And so we've been running a demand response service for a number of years from that neighborhood to BART, to give people the ability to get to BART without driving.
And just one thing, have you considered providing an alternate to Link's 88 paratransit? Because frankly, 88 paratransit is a god-awful system.
Well, let me answer that second question after I finish the first, real quick, because those are really two distinct questions. So this demand response service has never been very well used. There's maybe 30, 40 people a day availing themselves of this, and it's free because they're paying the tax through their property tax statement. So we thought, well, these are affluent people who tend to work in high technology jobs and so forth. So maybe they would like an app where they could use their smartphone to hail the ride, like an Uber or a Lyft. And so we worked with a company called Transloc, and we made the app available. We put software on the vehicles and in the dispatch center, and people were able to do that. And the same people that were already riding used the app, and nobody new came to the service. Then we had some technological issues with the software because it was so brand new, and that generation was not that worked that well. We are looking to replicate that again somewhere else in a future time. We are in the process now of completing an agreement with LAFTA, which shows that, I like to say that shows MTC small guys can work together. to have them extend their service where they're giving the subsidy to the user to get a subsidized ride on either Uber, Lyft, or a taxi cab company to go to the Dublin BART station into southern San Ramon, where in March of this past year, we ended a route. We no longer run the route that was carrying a low number of people per day, and it was highly inefficient. So those are the kinds of things we're looking at. Now, to your thing about ADA paratransit service, one of the reasons I'm excited about the potential of our CMA to go to the ballot in March with a half-cent sales tax is there's a line item in there for paratransit services for folks who are seniors or folks with disabilities that goes beyond the ADA, that is more customer-centric than the ADA. So we have plans. We just now need the voters to give us the money. And I'm not campaigning because, I'm technically on the job. But we could use that money to provide that kind of service. Because what we're finding, particularly with seniors with dementia, is service to the ADA standard is not really working for those folks. And I'm surprised that this happens, but it does, and I understand everyone's busy and lives are complicated. We will see people with Alzheimer's on our ADA paratransit service with no care attendant. And that can be dicey. And so we're not really set up in the ADA paratransit realm. Let me explain to the crowd real quickly what that is. So the Americans with Disabilities Act requires public transit to be fully accessible, whether it's a BART matching up with a train platform or a bus and a curb working, and there's a lift or a ramp so folks with disabilities can get and use the bus. Everything has to be done so folks with sight impairment can figure out how to read a schedule and that kind of stuff. We have bus stop announcements, for folks with sight impairment. We will offer materials in a way that people with hearing impairments can get communication on how to use the system. After you do all that, if there's still people who can't use the bus, and there are, you have to do what's called ADA paratransit service, which is essentially a dial-a-ride service where people call up on a telephone, make a trip reservation, and the vehicle comes and gets you at your curb and takes you to your destination. The standards for that were written in 1990, before there was any of this technology that we're now using in the transportation field, and it was anticipated to be very costly. So ADA paratransit service meets the letter of the law, and this is actually the way it works, is so if I am ADA eligible and I call my transfer provider and say I want to be picked up tomorrow at 9 a.m., they can offer me a trip as anywhere between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. and be compliant. And so a lot of systems do that because of, again, the lack of resources, and it's a very costly service. So,
and it is not rider-centric, and I just want to make it very clear, excuse me, sir, because I've gone and I know what it's like. ADA paratransit is a very bad, inefficient, inconvenient, and often incompetently run system. It is management top-heavy, and it is very expensive. And I do believe that your micro transit is exactly what I was asking about, because we would like what is being done, piloted in Boston. What we want is micro transit for everybody so that we don't need paratransit. And I hate to get on this whole thing, but I want people to understand that accessibility is part of civil rights, and it is protecting and upholding the civil rights of more than 25% of the population. I want SPUR and Transform.
Thank you.
Excuse me, to understand this and to respect this, and I'm looking forward to more positive work with all of you.
Yeah, this is a great conversation, and we can continue it afterwards. I appreciate your noting that. Let's do 1-2 questions, rapid fire. We'll do rapid fire in the panelists, and then let's all eat dinner. 1 and 2 in the back. Nick, and then in the back.
Europeans, as part of creating these regional agencies, have there been examples where either they've reduced the number of transit operators and or eliminated them and had one central agency? Because it seems like most examples, you've kept all those individual transit agencies, you've just coordinated them better.
So what happens to the agencies? And then in the back, what's your question? About the climate.
About getting our transportation-related carbon
Emissions.
down
Got it.
to approximately 12%.
Yeah. Okay. Consolidating operators, we need Greta, solving the world's climate crisis.
All right, very good question. Not that I know of, that any transit operator has been eliminated from the system in that regard, which doesn't mean there's, I would need to check that.
I think I didn't go that much into the history of this development in Sweden, but I would say that we have merged several actors during the last 40 years or something in different settings, you know, around in Sweden. Yep.
What I would say with respect to your question about climate emissions is we should be doing everything we can to make it easier for people to use transit. So part of that is identifying what those barriers are and working through the complexity to figure out how to fix them.
I would add that we have a state mandate now to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And we actually have an executive order as of a couple of weeks ago to apply that specifically to our transportation. Well, we've had a number of laws and executive orders over the past several years, but that has not been translated into what are the ramifications for public transit that should guide a region and their investments. So we haven't created that clear linkage such that, you know, there's all this money going towards public transit, and yet our emissions are not going down. So part of our set of policy proposals is actually creating very clear targets for reducing vehicle miles traveled and increasing a transit mode share increase, which are both components of how we get to zero emissions. Of course, electrifying our fleets, you know, all of these different things are part of it, but decreasing vehicle miles traveled and increasing transit use are core to that, and we need to be much more specific about what the actual translation of those state targets are in terms of our 2040, 2050 targets for transit mode share and vehicle miles traveled. And put that in law.
Awesome. Well, another big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you to you all for coming out tonight. I'm sure they'll stick around if we have a few more questions. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.